But because of the time, and inshallah ta'ala, we'll just talk for half an hour or less. We'll talk about something else. There was a statement mentioned in the khutbah by Al-Ala ibn Ziyad. Bukhari rahimahullah, he mentioned this in his Kitab al-Tafsir. He was كان يذكر النار يعني كان يذكر الناس النار, that he was reminding people of the hellfire. He was talking to the people about the hellfire. So someone passed by and he said, لماذا تقنط الناس? Why are you making people in despair? When you talk about the hellfire, people become sad, they become worried, it brings the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the heart. So why you're making them in disparity from the mercy of Allah? He says, how can I make them in despair from the mercy of Allah when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, يا عبادي الذين أسرفوا على أنفسهم لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله. He did not say قل. How can I make the people in despair from the mercy of Allah when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, O my slaves, and the ayah says قل, say, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, my slaves, قل يا عبادي الذين أسرفوا على أنفسهم, those who transgressed upon themselves. لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله, do not be in disparity from the mercy of Allah, because indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive all sins. Indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most forgiver, the most merciful. But he said, and also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَأَنَّ الْمُسْرِفِينَ هُمْ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ, that al-musrifin, which is قُلْ يَا عِبَادِي الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا. So the characteristics that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the first ayah, those who transgressed upon themselves, do not be in disparity from the mercy of Allah. Allah forgives all sins. But also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about the musrifin, those who transgress upon themselves, they are the people of the hellfire. He said, وَأَنَّ الْمُسْرِفِينَ هُمْ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ. Then he said to him and to the people, وَلَكِنَّكُمْ تُحِبُّونَ أَنْ يُبَشَّرَ أَحَدُكُمْ بِالْجَنَّةِ عَلَى مَسَاوِئِ عَمَلِ. But you people like for someone to give you the glad tidings of Jannah when you're upon sins. You like for people to tell you that, mashallah, have glad tidings, abshiru, with regards to the Jannah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised the believers al-Jannah while you are in the state of sin. And then he said, وَإِنَّمَا بشر أو أمر الله عز وجل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أن يبشر من أطاع وأن ينذر من عصى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام to give the bishara, to give the glad tidings to those who are obedient to him and to warn those who are disobedient to him. And this is the balance that we need to have in our life. But that statement that he said, which shows something that is in ourselves as human beings, and it tends to be a norm among the time that we live in, that you would hear less and less warnings. And people like to hear all kinds of bisharat, which is good. Bashiru wa la tunaffiru, as the Prophet ﷺ, he said, give glad tidings, do not repel people. Do not tell people that you're ruined, that you're this and that. This is a bad thing for a Muslim to say, of course. Man qala halaka an-nas فهو أهلكهم أو فهو أهلكهم, as the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that has two meanings to it. Whoever says people are perished, they're destroyed, they're ruined, the situation is very bad, things like this, he's the one that destroyed them. Or the other meaning, he is the one that is destroyed. So this is not permissible for someone to make general statements like this, but rather we should bring the heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and have the good expectations of Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. But we have to also warn, and we have to warn ourselves, because the Jannah is haqq and the nar, the hellfire, is haqq. Both are haqq, and both will have its people, and both will it will have its fill. It will be filled by human beings. So therefore the matter is a serious one, and we have to live this life with both, with the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and hoping for the rewards from Allah. And also the statement that he said, that you people don't like someone to give you, that you people like for someone to give you glad tidings when you're upon sins. This is something that we need to pay attention to again, because if a person walks in and he warns the gathering, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all from harm coming, we will take that person as a hero, as someone that is, he did so much good nasiha to the people because he warned them. But imagine someone comes and warns the people from something dangerous coming, and will say, why you disturb our comfort that we're having now? We're comfortable, we're having good time, so why you want to warn us of? This is foolishness, right? People will be fools if they do this. And what is even, much greater than this is when it comes to the everlasting life in the hereafter. And that's why the messengers of Allah, they were the best of all of the human beings. They did not really care about the desires of the people. They were not sent to please the people. They were sent with the haqq, and they had the best concern to the people. And sometimes when you have the concern to someone, you might make them hear something that they don't like to hear. You do that to your children, otherwise you're betraying them. If you just want them to hear whatever they like only, and you just go after their desires, and this is one of the things that we need to pay attention to matters in our homes, you will be betraying the responsibility of being a parent. You have to say good things, that is, if they do things, they will see good things, and you have to warn them also, and we have to have that balance so that the person does not fall into disparity from the mercy of Allah, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. And no matter what a person did to himself, if he repents to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most forgiver. That's why when we repent to Allah, we should always have the good expectations that our sins are forgiven by the mercy of Allah, not that we're dictating the matter upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wal-'iyadhu billah, but because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised us. But someone to continue to be in the state of sin and having that wishful thinking that, he will be forgiven, he will be forgiven, this is not the way of the believers, and the believers should have the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because of that, we need to have in our majalis and our gatherings the mention of the hereafter. This is also one of the things that has been becoming the norm now in our gatherings, and even in gatherings that talks about matters of deen and so on. I'm not sure, maybe I'm wrong, but what I'm witnessing is that there are less and less talk about the hereafter, less and less talk about the day of Al-Qiyamah, less talk about the Jannah and the hellfire. And most of it, or there's lots of talk which is very, very benefiting, yes, about things that would fix our worldly matters, which we need to know the halal and the haram and transactions and how to make salah. This is essential ilm, and this is a beautiful ilm, and we have to be upon this. But also we have to have the balance so that our hearts are purified. And the majalis of the people of knowledge and the majalis of the early generations of Islam was about this. And actually, matters of aqeedah, matters of salah, matters of transaction, these are matters of hereafter. So when we talk about what's halal and haram and buying and selling, these are majalis of the hereafter. It's not majalis of dunya. It's not majalis of worldly matters, because we get to know what Allah forbade and what Allah permitted, because this will have its effect in the hereafter. And whoever wants to really be upon az-zuhd and to be in state of abstinence from this being attached to this dunya, let him learn the rulings of buying and selling, as some said, because it makes you have this, the heart is less attached to the worldly matter, more attached to the hereafter, because we have to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these matters. And the same thing when we talk about any subject in the deen, this is always have to be tied to the hereafter and what's coming ahead and so on. That's why, very briefly, inshallah, something that is we need to remind ourselves with, and we mentioned this before, and it might be some things that we would hear. It's Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah. It's a beautiful to mention what some of the words that he said when he talked about some things that would corrupt the hearts. And the heart, if it's corrupted, it's not able to, physically a person is not able to do anything. So we need to work on purifying our hearts. And as mentioned, if you have dirt in your body, you wash it, you clean it. And this is every single decent human being would do. Sins contaminate our hearts. But if we don't put the effort to clean it, we're like that person that is physically not clean, and he sits with people, then he would disturb the whole environment. And this is why sins disturb communities. Individual sins causes disputes. Individual sins causes all kinds of evil things that happens, and people don't understand why this is happening. It's exactly like if someone walks in with a terrible smell, Will people be sitting pleasant and smiling and comfortable? No, they will be so much disturbed. This is how sins are, but we don't smell it, but it has an effect, and there's evidence to this. So we need to constantly purify ourselves by taking the means to be away from what corrupts our hearts. And we talked about good manners as a foundation of that, and with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm not sure this is the correct way to choose this topic, because there's part of it that is related to food, and it's not intentional, and has nothing to do with that the food is coming so that you eat less or anything like this. Once in a while, you should eat as much as you can, alhamdulillah, but not all the time, not the norm, right? So if there's a gathering, mashallah, it's blessing, so eat as much as you can, as long as there's food. Because this is one of the things that he said that it corrupts the heart, is ash-shiba', or to be full all the time. But one of which is that is important is kathratu al-mukhalata, the too much mixing. Mixing with people, either it's a benefiting thing or it can harm. And we have to mix with people. This is how human beings are created. They created to be with one another, and there's so much complex relationships. And as we heard yesterday and the day before, when it comes to husnul khuluq, is about how to deal with these types of relationships that we have in our life. Not according to what we think, or not according even to just the norm of what we live in, but according to the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And you have to be patient if people are not applying this, because we are addressed by the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ individually, and we have in the Prophet ﷺ the best example. And we need to hold fast to this. It's in a changing world. The deen of Islam doesn't change. The whole world needs to change according to the deen of Islam, and not the opposite. So we need to hold fast to the deen of Allah. We need to go back and see how the deen of Allah was according to the way of the Prophet ﷺ, the early generations of Islam, and to be patient with that, because this is how to protect our hearts from all sorts of corruption. So how many, if we just think of how many sins are committed because of other people in our life. And then when we talk about our homes, how many sins are committed because of one's wife, because of one's husband, because of one's children. And having this ability to be able to see where the sins are coming from is one of the ways to cure ourselves and to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So either people will be a source of benefit for each and every one of us, or source of misery. And there are so many things in the Quran where, as we know, that the disbelievers will curse one another in the Day of Judgment. And those who followed versus those who followed them, and things like this. People would, even the closest friends, the closest relationships, if they in the Day of Judgment are from among the people of the hellfire, they will curse each other, and they would wish that they never ever met before. وَيَوْمَ يَعَضُّ الظَّالِمُ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ يَقُولُ يَا لَيْتَنِي اتَّخَذْتُ مَعَ الرَّسُولِ سَبِيلًا يَا وَيْلَتَى لَيْتَنِي لَمْ أَتَّخِذْ فُلَانًا خَلِيلًا لَقَدْ أَضَلَّنِي عَنِ الذِّكْرِ بَعْدَ إِذْ جَاءَنِي وَكَانَ الشَّيْطَانُ لِلْإِنسَانِ خَذُولًا. Which means on the day when the zalim, the wrongdoer, would bite on his hands, and he would say, I wish I find the path to follow the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. يَا لَيْتَنِي اتَّخَذْتُ مَعَ الرَّسُولِ سَبِيلًا. I wish I took with the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam his same path. And then he would say about himself, woe to myself, يا ليتني يا ويلتا ليتني, I wish I never took so and so. Fulanan is a person, an individual by his name. That's what fulanan means. But of course, this is for everybody that would be in such a situation. So that means in the Day of Judgment, as the ulama, they say in the tafsir, that person would say the name of his friend. He would say, Laitani, I did not take, and he would say his name. I wish I didn't take him as my Khalil or my closest friend. Why? لَقَدْ أَضَلَّنِي عَنِ الذِّكْرِ بَعْدَ إِذْ جَاءَنِي. He had deviated me away from the dhikr, from the Quran, from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, after it came to me. And this is how the shaitan, he takes the people. So why is that? It's because of the bad mixing with others. We mix with people outside of our homes, and we mix with our loved ones in our homes. And that has an effect on this, and this has an effect on that. And that's why we have to secure our homes and to build our iman, so that when we go outside to mix with people, then we have that strength that we're able to mix with them only in matters of goodness, and we protect ourselves from committing sins just because we are in a certain crowd or a certain situation. And also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Al-akhillau yawma'idin ba'duhum li ba'din adu illa al-muttaqin. That al-akhilla, this is the plural of khalil, the closest ones to each other in this life, they will be enemies to each other except the muttaqin. Only the muttaqin, those who are close to each other, or even if they don't know each other, what brought them is the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the fear of Allah. They will be, in the day of judgment together. Their love for the sake of Allah will continue. Otherwise, those who were not upon taqwa, they would be enemies to each other. And it doesn't matter what type of relationship that they had in this life. Even if it's one's son, one's parents, one's husband, wife, whatever there is, if they're not in the day of judgment from among the people of Jannah, then it will be enmity, an everlasting one. Wal-'iyadhu billah. And this is again and again one of the things that a person should advise himself and his children and his family, that we want this relationship to continue forever. We don't want this relationship to be only in this life. Because if one is in Jannah and one is in the hellfire, wal-'iyadhu billah, then there's no more relationship. So we want that relationship to continue forever. How to do that is by saving ourselves from the hellfire. And many verses in the Quran that talks about this. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, when he said that how to perfect in a brief statements this issue of mixing with people, because as we know, there's no excuse in sins. And al-mu'min alladhi yukhalitu an-nas wa yasbir ala adha, the believer that mixes with people and he's patient when it comes to the harm that comes from them, he is better. خير من المؤمن الذي لا يخالط الناس ولا يصبر على أذاهم, is better than the one that doesn't mix with people, and as a result of that he's not patient with their harm. So it's best to mix with people, but to be patient. It is not mixing with people and in the absolute sense and then compromise your deen. It's not like we need to do something, we need to establish the deen of Allah, we need to establish ourselves, and this is not the goal. This is the goal, and the mean has to be according to the deen of Allah. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us to do something, we are slaves of Allah. And read the stories in the Quran. Read of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when people submit themselves as ibad, as slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the outcome is beyond what they imagine. So if you ever think that you know the outcome of your actions, this is not right. We don't know the outcome of our actions. And if you are obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the outcome in this life is far beyond of what you can even imagine. وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. Whoever fears Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, two things will make ways out for him, way out of difficulties, tightness, whatever there is. And he will provide for him where he does not expect, beyond one's expectations. With what? With the taqwa of Allah, with the fear of Allah. So this is the comfort of this life, that it's beyond our capacity to expect what's going to happen. We just need to submit ourselves with ilm, with knowledge of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us, and rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and leave the matter to Allah, the one that created you. You would see by the mercy of Allah things that you can never ever imagine that this would happen to you. And this is to all of the messengers of Allah. Whoever sees the Prophet ﷺ in the time when he was in Mecca, he would never see or expect that this is what's going to happen to the Prophet ﷺ after just less than 23 years. The status of the believers at the end of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And the same thing with every Prophet of Allah. When they were obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made ways out for them. So the proper understanding of how to mix with one another is that people should be mixed in matters of al-khayr. So people either will be mixed in matters of goodness, which is no doubt it's a good thing, like the Jumu'ah, like the Jama'at, the Jama'ah in the Masjid, Al-A'yad in the Eid, in the Hajj, learning the ilm, the knowledge, Al-Jihad fi Sabilillah, Al-Nasiha. When someone is given nasiha to someone, this is good mixing that people are in need. So this is no doubt, and this is something also that we need to learn with ilm. And there are some duties to be done in our masajid and some duties to be done at home, like the salah, for example. Men, it's an obligatory thing for them to pray in the masjid, as the Prophet ﷺ did. And even for those who said that Salatul Jama'ah is not wajibah, they were not praying at home. And this is one of the I don't know how to put that together, that sometimes some knowledge is bad for a person. How can that be? Knowledge is always a beautiful thing. But when someone receives a piece of ilm that makes him act less of good deeds, that's not a good thing for him. Right? So if someone get to see, according to some opinion, that Salatul Jama'ah is mustahabba and it's not obligatory. For example, I'm not saying that this is the correct opinion. That means what, a person would leave it, relax. He used to come for Salatul Jama'ah, but then he heard someone says that it's only recommended, so he stays home. If it's recommended, that means a person should even put more effort to come. And we have in the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam the best example. Never prayed at home unless he was sick alayhi salatu wasalam, and this is one of the excuses of missing Salatul Jama'ah. So the Fard Salah is to be prayed at home. The Fard Salah is to be prayed in the masjid for the men. And the best place for women to pray is at home. This is their best place. But if they come to the masjid, sure, as long as they observe the hijab and all of the different etiquettes according to the deen of Allah, not according to the norm and not according to feminists and all of this, according to the deen of Allah, to the wahy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to follow that. So this is the deen of Allah. And then when it comes to the optional salah, the best place to do the optional salah or the recommended salah is to do it at home. And as the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he made it very clear, صلوا في بيوتكم. And some of the hadith, لا تجعلوا بيوتكم قبورا. Do not make your homes as graveyards. Pray in your home. What prayer at home is the sunnah prayers, is the mustahab salah, is the night prayer. And this is one of the duties to be done at home. And that's why when someone prays the fard in the masjid and he prays the sunnah in the masjid and then doesn't pray anything at home, praying the sunnah in the masjid is a good thing. And if you're praying sunnah in the masjid, continue to do so. Do not take the words from this that you pray sunnah at home, because it's been made very clear that whoever decides to pray sunnah at home, because of our weaknesses, he end up not praying sunnah at all. He will forget, he'll go home and be busy with something else, all these types of things. So therefore, when the ulama, they talk about this, which is better, to pray sunnah in the masjid or at home? In general, in principle, of course at home. But when it comes to our reality, pray in the masjid. And also, if the situation is that when people don't see others praying sunnah, they might think there is no sunnah prayer. So therefore, praying it in the masjid is a good thing. And then when you go home, pray salah. And one of the sunnah is when you enter your home, you pray 2 rak'ah. It protects you from madkhal al-su', from the evil entering of the house. And when you leave, you pray 2 rak'ah. It protects you from the evil exiting the house. We need barakah when we enter. We need barakah and protection when we leave. When we enter our homes, how many fights and arguments and all kinds of disturbances at home? Because we don't take, in many cases, the religious means, the way to enter the home. It's not just about saying salam, starting with the sawak as the Prophet ﷺ did, and part of which is, imagine that if we have problems or we don't have problems, but it requires a lot of effort, yes, is that when you enter your home, make it as a habit, you pray 2 rak'ah before you do anything. And the same thing when you wake up at night, for example, right? What is the first thing that nowadays many would do is that they would grab their phone and they would see what's in their phones. If you make it upon yourself that you don't do that whatsoever till you get up and you make wudu and you pray 2 rak'ah, and then maybe you can see whatever you want to see. But this is part of having the proper etiquettes with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when it comes to the night prayer and the like of this. So the subject of ibadat at home, this is a subject that needs to be stressed, whether it's salah, whether it's reciting Quran, like Surah Al-Baqarah at home, the shayateen, they run away from the homes. And ta'limul ilm, also to teach those who are at home, those who do not come in the masjid, the wife, the children, and so on. To push away the haram things from our home, that pushes away the barakah from it. Whether it's anything that is haram, seeing haram, listening to haram, music and the like of this. So a person protecting his home from what's haram is an obligation. And the sad reality is, who's the one that is going to bear all of these sins? First is the head of the household, which is the man. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that appointed the man to be in charge of his house. it doesn't matter whether his personality is weak or not. He is appointed already. This is something that is given to him by Allah. الرجال قوامون على النساء. This is a fact. Men are قوامون, that means they are in charge of women. They are the ones in charge of their homes. They will be questioned in the day of judgment about everything that happens in their home. A boss or a leader, he's responsible for everyone that does anything in whatever place of authority for them. And also the ones that do things are also responsible. But you would find the leader of a company, something happens in the company, the one that did it or did wrong, he's to be accused, and also the one, his manager, is accused, because it was his fault that he was managing in the proper way, especially that if it's was part of his authority, but he didn't implement it. The same thing for the men. And that's why the rights of the men and the wife and the husband is according to this, according to what's going to be in the hereafter. It's not according to having fun in this life. The rights of the wife and the rights of the husband is not, it's not just made for people to have fun in this life. So my rights upon you is that I spend money on the wife and she's obedient to me just to have a good life. So there's going to be question in the day of judgment about this. The men are the maintainers, yes, they are the ones in charge, and they spend from their money and so on. And in return, the wife, she's obedient to her husband. She is devoted to her husband. فالصالحات قانتات حافظات للغيب بما حفظ الله. الصالحات, the righteous woman, she is qanita. Al-qunut is when you stand in salah. In this context, that means she's devoted to her husband, to fulfill the needs of her husband. She's obedient to her husband in matters of ma'ruf, not in matters of sins. And he's extremely kind to her. استوصوا بالنساء خيرا, because this is deen. Be kind to your wife. It goes this way. This is the deen of Allah, with all the details of it. But when one is not fulfilling the right of the other, one is not taking care of his household the way he ought to, he's not having the good manners with his wife and so on, and she's disobedient to him, what we expect for the house to be filled of shayateen, wa'adhu billah. So to be obedient to Allah with these types of mixing and observing these rulings in the deen of Islam. So in matters of goodness, we're always together. Our homes, we are in charge of it. There's no such a thing. If it's a matter of goodness, I'll mix with my family. If it's a matter of evil, I'll stay away. You're responsible for not having evil in the house. That means there's no evil in the house. This is the responsibility of the man. And that's why choosing the wife comes from the matter starts from early on. But if it happened that it's already present, meaning there is already situations of evil and so on, then we need to have the wisdom to make sure that we eliminate it, to bring what is good. And every person is unique, but we have to take actions seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. When it comes to evil and haram, there is no exception whatsoever. It is mandatory for the Muslim to be away from mixing with people while they're doing haram. Right? If people are committing sins now, right, you cannot be with them while they're committing the sins. You can only advise them, and if they don't listen, then you have to leave. But it's not permissible for you to be in the same gathering while they're committing sins. What are sins? There are many sins. Right, so this is very obvious too. And if a person, he says, فَإِنْ دَعَتِ الْحَاجَةُ إِلَى خُلْطَتِهِمْ فِي الشَّرِّ. What if a person has to, in some situations, that he's in the plane, for example, or something like this, and someone is committing a sin, he's not going to jump from the plane. So then be warned against being approving of what they're doing. If you have to be in a situation like this, your heart has to work. You cannot be at ease with a sin being committed. You have to have in your heart that you opposing this. You're not approving this in your heart. And be patient when it comes, if the harm comes from their way and so on. And if people would start to approve in their hearts what people are upon when it comes to matters of sins, this is one of the warnings that punishment will come and would not discriminate. We have to abhor the sins. We have to dislike the sins. We have to be away from it. And the more the person becomes at ease with it, the more that it brings the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even when a person is not committing the sins. So we have to have that barrier in our hearts. We have to raise our children that there's halal and there's haram. And the haram is to be avoided, and the haram is so evil. Inna Allah la yuhibbul kafirin, inna Allah la yuhibbul zalimin. Allah does not love the disbelievers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not love the wrongdoers. And al-mu'amala, when you deal with others, this is something else. You deal with them with kindness, with goodness, you invite them to the haqq and so on, but never to be at ease with the sins and disobedience to Allah and matters of disbelief. This is the deen of Allah that a person has to be upon. So this is one of the things that can affect our hearts in a negative way, the issue of mixing and so on, whether it's in our homes or outside of our homes, and understanding the issue of authorities that we have. We'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala, because of the time and Salatul Isha and the food. And then we'll continue, inshallah ta'ala, later afterwards. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us benefit of what we heard. Sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Muhammad wa sahbihi wa sallam.